Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here with each of you, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I really felt the sort of community and beauty of all of you and what you bring. It's incredibly touching to hear each of you share how you are, what's happening in your life, and to have that connection to community. I actually read the article that said smoking a pack of cigarettes a day is not nearly going to kill you as much as was shared as loneliness. And so it's interesting because when I thought about my remarks for today, I thought about the trajectory of my life. Um, and it's very interesting because much of what you shared so far is really right in line with many of the things that we all struggle with. Um, New Hour was started 8 years ago, and I founded New Hour after having come home from incarceration myself. And my history with the amazing Allison David Sprinson and the Pfeiffers goes back to my time working at the Long Island Progressive Coalition. And I can remember coming home from prison. I was 21 years old. I had my 21st birthday in prison. Um, and when I came home, I did any job I could. I cleaned houses. I couldn't get a job on the books. I had a conviction. No one would hire me. And eventually I landed a job working as a barista, still cleaned houses on the side, rode my bike to work, lived in a shelter. And I remember distinctly going to an interview with the Long Island Progressive Coalition. They needed an office manager. And I sat in the interview and thought, they're never going to give me this job because I have a conviction. And I remember telling Lisa Tyson at the time, yes, I have a conviction, I've come home. And she really didn't even blink. And that was when I understood that those of us who are doing this work, the work of racial justice, climate justice, um, policy change, really see that deep connection and see that issues that impact women behind bars, systemic issues of oppression in our community are absolutely connected to our very flawed criminal justice system. And one of the things I've realized over the years of working on bills to ban the shackling of women in labor behind bars, working to support children who have a parent incarcerated so they don't lose their connection to their parent behind bars, I've realized very, very clearly that what we have is not a problem with crime and safety. It is a problem with racism. It is a problem with othering. It is a problem very deeply connected to how we see ourselves in community to those around us. And I think about Long Island and the struggles we have here, the deep socioeconomic divides that we see from Hempstead to Garden City, literally crossing a street. I think a lot about how we as a community come together to support each other. And when I founded New Hour, it was because a dear, dear couple came to me and said, we volunteered in the jails. There's no services for women. And I thought, it's 20 years later. I've been home from prison for 20 years and nothing in that jail has changed. And that made me really angry. And at that point, I said, let's make a plan. Let's create a blueprint to support people. And to date, we have 15 programs in the jails every week. We meet with women and mothers in Suffolk County Jail, Nassau County Jail, and we've impacted about 9,000 women across Long Island and their children. And one of the things I think about often, because New Hour's mission is to empower justice-impacted women, children, and families, is how do we bring the community into this? And one thing that is so salient in this is that when you explain to your neighbor, to someone you talk to at the supermarket, to someone at a coffee house, the work of supporting people, there really is so much grace and generosity. It's the generosity that each of you have shown Project Dignity with hundreds of bags that Sue Pfeiffer and all of the amazing volunteers brought to our office in Brentwood. It really is that there is much more good in the world than there is bad. And that is something that we don't always grow up knowing. We're told often that the world is a scary place and a bad place, and there's many people to fear. At least that's how I was raised. And what I've found is that there is a wonderful collective of those of us who want to help others and do good. And I remember once I did an interview with a senator. His name was Senator Duane, and he said, I don't even know what a woman's prison looks like. I just know what's on these crime shows. What does it look like to be in a prison filled with women?" And I said, "Well, what does it look like to be in a room filled with people anywhere?" and I said, "They're grandmothers, they're mothers, they're sisters. They take care of each other. We support each other. We cry when, we lose family members or when children graduate and we can't be there." And one of the things that became very clear to me is that we need to educate each other and the public about who are the people behind bars. And just this past 2 weeks, my staff and I, we have a small staff of 8 of us, 2 part-time and 6 full-time, and we went up to Bedford Hills. This is the maximum security prison for women in New York State. And it's the very same prison that I spent 3 years of my life in. Walking through that gate as a free person to visit women who have been there ever since I left was incredibly painful and confusing. And when I sat in the visiting room, visiting women like Kim and Nancy and EVA and Deb, I realized that prisons in and of themselves do not create safety, do not create real healing. And I thought to myself, Deb, who's done 24 years in prison, what good is she behind bars any longer? She's served her time, she's been held accountable, and in fact, she's really worked on herself to become a different person than the 17-year-old she was when she committed a terrible crime. And when I left the prison that day, I thought, it's just a gate and a couple of bars that keeps people there forever. And it is truly a death sentence. I can hope that at one point we will imagine a world where we think about restorative justice, where we hold people accountable, where we make sure we're safe, but that we also provide opportunities for people to give back, to support and change, to pay their dues to those they've harmed, not by simply sitting in a cell 23 hours out of the day, but by really taking accountability and atoning. And I think often about the women who walk through my doors. Most of them have committed nonviolent offenses. Most of them have been in the jail, maybe 6 months, 2 years, 3 months. Most of them have survived terrible abuse, substance abuse, loneliness. And when I think about what leads people to become incarcerated, women are often the fastest growing population of those behind bars. And everyone says, well, why are women being incarcerated at higher rates than men? And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the sort of systemic misogyny in which judges and courts sentence women to longer sentences than men for the same crimes. And I also think about a lawmaker who said to me, when a woman becomes a mother, that just means she will stop having a substance abuse problem. Being a mother means you will never have, you will just turn the page. And, we laughed and said that that's not how substance abuse works. But we continue to criminalize people for coping with their trauma. And while we have to hold people accountable, I often think about the fact that if we were able to provide support for people when they were lonely, when they were in pain, that us as a community, we continue to find ways to support people. And that's what New Hour does every day. But when you don't support people, it is also on us to think about how come people commit crimes. It is the responsibility of our full community. And so it really does warm my heart to see the ethical humanist society come together to love and care for each other and to create community. I often think about the women who come to our events. We have, 12 events a year for back to school and different things. And women say, I'm just so grateful that I have a place to go where my children don't see me as just someone who was an inmate, but as a mom who's now able to take care of her children again. And I think about how we continue to stigmatize people who have been incarcerated. And some of the smartest, nicest people I've ever met have been people I met behind bars. And I know that sounds crazy, but it is absolutely the struggle of surviving in an environment that is deeply oppressive, intentionally harmful. In fact, I remember visiting Rikers Island. We visited the nursery that they have there for new mothers. And one of the units was painted a Pepto-Bismol color pink. And it was a disturbing feeling to walk into a room with this bright pink color. And I said to the warden, why are the walls pink? And they said, well, we've done studies, and what we've found is that this color actually, it creates discomfort. And that is why we have this color in this area, because we want people to not feel comfortable in this space. And I thought, that is the opposite of creating peace and safety for people. And yet there is an intentional harm that our current criminal justice system in New York State wreaks on people. And if you look at the Norwegian model in Norway, the cells look like college dorms. There's wooden, furniture. There's gardening. One of the things that we think about when we think of prison is punishment. But if you're not able to really help people overcome the trauma and pain and anger and harm that they've already had, Barbara Allen and Barbara Treen on this call talk all the time about if you put a tiger in a cage and leave him there for 20 years and let him out, you're going to get an even angrier tiger in a cage. So we have a lot of work to do, and together I think we're on our way. I've watched some of our children who have had mothers incarcerated now go off to college, get honors in high school. We've paid for their summer camp. We've given them clothing. We've supported their mothers with basic needs, transportation, bus tickets, railroad tickets. Just making your way across Long Island is extremely hard if you don't have a car. And so some of these things that are very simple, we meet their needs. Just recently, we had a new woman come through our doors, and she spent 30 years in prison. And one of the things that she said was, I don't know how to use a phone. I don't know how to use Zoom. I don't know how to look up a bus schedule. I've never used the internet. I mean, when you think about setting people up for failure, she's in her 60s, late 60s, and she's never had access to any technology. And so it is really overwhelming to think about what some people coming home from incarceration face, especially the aging, in their 70s, 80s, leaving prison for the first time, reacclimating, and having exceptional loss that they've had. One of our men said to me, I lost my whole family while I was incarcerated. My mother, my sister, everyone's gone. And he's here trying to repair his life and riding a bike in his 70s to get around Long Island. We worry about him constantly. And I think a lot of the work that we do at New Hour is really focused on not just meeting the direct needs, but also thinking about how do we as a community create healthy communities together. And I think you're a perfect example of a healthy community where you care about each other and think of each other, and ask, how are you doing? Part of the work that we do at New Hour is really about creating community. We happen to be people who've been incarcerated, but we're just community members at this point. And I was thinking about it yesterday. I have my dog Trooper, and he has been through everything with me. And I think a lot about how our pets really do sustain us in times of pain and loneliness. He knows when I'm upset. He comes and sits by me, and he gets me going. We're going to take a walk, get outside. Some of these basic human needs are to be seen and to feel heard and to feel love. And part of what prison does is strips that away from almost everyone. I will also share that one of our little girls, her grandmother was incarcerated. We worked with the grandmother. Her mother was incarcerated. We worked with the mother, and we helped her with support to go to counseling and then high school. And she's graduating with honors this coming week. So I'd like to think that the work we're doing is really about creating sustainable families and support for all of us. And part of our challenge is we are small but mighty, and always looking for folks to shout us out, share on Facebook, share on social media, let people know we exist. Even if you have folks who you think might be interested in supporting us, we would so appreciate it. And frankly, we've been overwhelmed with the wonderful support from the Ethical Humanist Society, because each of the Project Dignity bags goes to a woman who's leaving a facility. And one of the things that we've noticed right away was whatever clothing you get arrested in is the clothing you have to wear when you're released. So if it's very cold and you were arrested in the summer, you might be leaving the facility in flip-flops. You might not have a coat. And you certainly don't have any real money in your pocket. And one of the things we did recently was we picked a woman up from the Nassau jail. We met her with clothing, a Project Dignity bag that you gave us, you supplied us with, that had everything she needed to go stay at the shelter. And we paid for her railroad ticket to get her to Maryland to her grandmother's. And later on that day, she went with our social worker. They took the train with her. She said, I don't want to pick up any substance. I don't want to use any substances. Can you take the ride with me? She was really afraid that she would start using, drugs. And our social worker took the trip with her, traveled by train, brought her to the next stop. We paid for her ticket to get onto the Metro North. And she sent us a picture later that night. She hadn't seen her 6-year-old and 10-year-old in 2 years. She sent a picture with her 2 children. So those are the stories that keep us going. And of course, her grandmother said thank you, and we were able to get her right into a substance abuse treatment program. She went right away. Part of the challenge is the lack of connection and collaboration between different agencies. And so if we're able to fill that gap, we're really able to save lives, and ultimately, not just the women, but their children. And so it feels, incredibly heartwarming, and we're so grateful to see that just this little bit of effort that we can have make such a marked difference in people's lives. So never underestimate one small thing you can do to change someone's life. But I'm honored to be here with you today. I appreciate your intention in this space, and also truly appreciate folks like Sue and Ken Pfeiffer and David and Alice, part of creating community is simply just saying, hey, come on over for dinner. And that really does make a difference in people's lives. So thank you all for having us today. I'll put my information in the chat, and we'd love to see you all soon and engage in any way that makes sense. We really truly appreciate the time that you've given to creating beautiful bags of needed supplies for our women. And we're very, very happy and honored to be part of your community. So thank you for accepting us, and appreciate being here with you today.
Thank you so much, Serenia. I know you have to leave early, but you have an opportunity for a question or two.
Yes.
Does anybody have a question? David, come on up.
Dear Serena, let me say that I am so pleased and satisfied with the success you've had in your life, and I think of a few people who deserve it more, and what you've done with New Hour is really a tribute to the person you are, and it gives me a great deal of satisfaction to see that success. So I wish you well, and it's great to have Barbara Treen and Barbara Allen along here. We have a long history of working on that. They have a long history of working on people in prison and trying to help them. But the work you've done is kind of really fantastically creative and beautifully supportive. And it gives me personally and Alice a great deal of satisfaction to see that you have succeeded so well, because you really deserve it. So it's.
Thank you so much, David. And I can't emphasize enough that the outstretched hands of people like David and Alice and so many others, mentoring me along the way, supporting me, treating me just like a regular person, that level of acceptance and of the understanding of human dignity is something that I did not feel in prison and did not feel from the community. So really, the tenets that you speak of at the Ethical Humanist Society, I felt from David and Alice and Sue and Ken and so many others. So I'm truly appreciative.
Serenia, I wonder if I can ask you like a detailed question about how the organization operates. When do you first encounter the women who are incarcerated? Do you meet them while they're still incarcerated and scheduled for release, or do you only encounter them after they're released?
Yes, that's a great question. So we go into the jails across Long Island. We have 15 classes we run every week. So typically we meet women when they've just become arrested or they've just been, put into the jail in Suffolk and Nassau. We'll also be launching a program at Rikers Island at the Rosie's, the Rose M. Singer facility. You've heard about 37 deaths at Rikers Island this year alone. The conditions there are very dire, but I will also say those conditions are absolutely happening in the Nassau jail. People die and it's covered up, and there's a lot of disruption and chaos in the Nassau jail. So that is usually our first encounter. The other thing that people will do is they will send us an email from prison, and they'll say, I'm coming back to Long Island. I don't know where I'm going to live. I need some support coming home. And they'll reach out to us, and then we'll meet with them. So what's most rewarding is being able to pick women up the day they're released, bring them to our office, give them a Project Dignity bag, and really work on their reentry plan. They'll meet with our social worker, our case manager, and then we have wraparound programs. So we have a leadership program called Emerge, and it's a 15-week program to help women sort of reintegrate into the community after incarceration, create space for them.
That's great, thanks. You said that you were at Bedford Hills Correctional Center. There's a really strong documentary that maybe we can see one day called Women of Bedford, and it talks about Bedford Hills Prison, Mother's Day at Bedford Hills. It's very poignant, and maybe we'll want to see that. Frank has a question. No,
I have to stay here? Oh, okay. First of all, thank you so much, Serena, for that really beautiful, inspiring, powerful talk. I'm so glad that you mentioned the Norwegian model, which is so much more humane, as I understand it, than our model of prisons. I was wondering if you know what efforts are being made in the country to move our prison system more in that direction.
Yes, that's a wonderful question, and I think a lot about the mission of New Hour to meet the needs of women and children, but we're working within a system that is deeply inherently flawed. And I do think that over the next, 10, 20 years, part of what we've seen sort of throughout the decades is this movement to, as a community and as the United States is really recognizing that, one out of every three people has been incarcerated. As we move through the decade, the last few decades and the current ones coming, what we are going to see is that more people have been impacted by mass incarceration than not. And so I would imagine that, I'm part of a group of fellows that is national. So we'll gather in Tennessee with folks doing amazing work across the country. And I would love to see an effort to really reimagine what the model of incarceration is. And I do think that there are many ways in which we do have to hold people accountable, and there are people who are not well and need to be supported and treated. I would love to see us move towards the Norwegian model, because one of the things that it does tout is the lowest recidivism rates, the rate at which people return to prison or jail. And I should say that the average rate of return is 65% across Long Island. So for every 100 people that go to jail, 65 will return because their needs aren't being met. Now, women who work with us in our program, there is a 2% recidivism rate. So what you're seeing is the drastic, stark difference when you meet people and provide services versus simply allowing them to be put in a cell and then let out.
Thank you so much, Serenia. Of course, in the federal, no, Ken Corn, in the federal system, there was the First Step Act during Trump's administration, a bipartisan effort to reform prison. And right away now, for as little as that accomplished, all the Republican candidates are vowing to cancel it or re-reform it. Ken has a quick question.
Serena, it's so wonderful to see you. I won't repeat all of David's comments about how proud we are of you. I'll just say very quickly, it gives us lots of nachas. So thank you. Really glad you're doing so well. It's my understanding, without any detail, that your organization's running or starting a transitional housing program, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Great to see you. So blessed by you and Susan. Yes, I should have mentioned this. So two things. Topeka Sam is a dear friend of mine who was integral in creating the First Step Act, which is really it does very little in terms of overarching support, but it is literally a first step for folks coming home to not face some of the challenges. So the idea of undoing something that is such a small step is really just doesn't make any sense. But I should have mentioned, we just bought a house and we are going to be renovating it over the summer to hold up to 12 women as a transitional house. One of the biggest challenges we have, women come home to no home, shelter. I lived in a shelter myself. Women come home to an abuser or to unhealthy family situations. So if we can provide them a safe place to live for 6 months to a year while they get on their feet and get a job, one of the bills that we're working for this year is the Clean Slate Bill, which would allow people who've done their time to have better opportunities for employment by sealing their record, obviously not to law enforcement or the courts. And, there's a bunch of preclusions to that, including sex offenses, but to allow people to have gainful employment and to say they've done their time and now they deserve a job. But we would love support on the house. We'll eventually need to decorate it and we'll have a ribbon cutting. Right now, we're working with an architect to rebuild we purchased a small piece of property in Brentwood, and the house has to be completely gutted. And so it's a very big job. But we're excited to have it. And many of our women have said, the idea of having a safe bedroom, a room of their own with their own closet that's safe is really going to make sure they succeed in reentry. So we'll keep you posted on that. We'd love to have your support and engagement on that project.